Morning, sunshines. So today we're going to talk about plastics. Plastics. Here's a little video just to start it off, telling you what plastics are.
Today, plastics are everywhere. All of this plastic originated from one small object that isn't even made of plastic. For centuries, billiard balls were made of ivory from elephant tusks. But when excessive hunting caused elephant populations to decline in the 19th century, billiard balls makers began to look for alternatives, offering huge rewards. So, in 1863, an American named John Wesley Hyatt took up the challenge. Over the next 5 years, he invented a new material called celluloid, made from cellulose, a compound found in wood and straw. Hyatt soon discovered celluloid couldn't solve the billiard ball problem. The material wasn't heavy enough and didn't bounce quite right, but it could be tinted and patterned to mimic more expensive materials like coral, tortoiseshell, amber, and mother of pearl. He had created what became known as the first plastic. The word plastic can describe any material made of polymers, which are just large molecules consisting of the same repeating subunit. This includes all human-made plastics, as well as many of the materials found in living things. But in general, when people refer to plastics, they're referring to synthetic materials. The unifying feature of these is that they start out soft and malleable and can be molded into a particular shape. Despite taking the prize as the first official plastic, celluloid was highly flammable, which made production risky. So inventors began to hunt for alternatives. In 1907, a chemist combined phenol, a waste product of coal tar, and formaldehyde, creating a hardy new polymer called Bakelite. Bakelite was much less flammable than celluloid, and the raw materials used to make it were more readily available. Bakelite was only the beginning. In the 1920s, researchers first commercially developed polystyrene, a spongy plastic used in insulation. Soon after came polyvinyl chloride, or vinyl, which was flexible yet hardy. Acrylics created transparent, shatterproof panels that mimicked glass. And in the 1930s, nylon took center stage, a polymer designed to mimic silk but with many times its strength. Starting in 1933, polyethylene became one of the most versatile plastics, still used today to make everything from grocery bags to shampoo bottles to bulletproof vests. New manufacturing technologies accompanied this explosion of materials. The invention of a technique called injection molding made it possible to insert melted plastics into molds of any shape, where they would rapidly harden. This created possibilities for products in new varieties and shapes, and a way to inexpensively and rapidly produce plastics at scale. Scientists hoped this economical new material would make items that once had been unaffordable accessible to more people. Instead, plastics were pushed into service in World War II. During the war, plastic production in the United States quadrupled. Soldiers wore new plastic helmet liners and water-resistant vinyl raincoats. Pilots sat in cockpits made of plexiglass, a shatterproof plastic, and relied on parachutes made of resilient nylon. Afterwards, plastic manufacturing companies that had sprung up during wartime turned their attention to consumer products. Plastics began to replace other materials like wood, glass, and fabric in furniture, clothing, shoes, televisions, and radios. Versatile plastics opened up possibilities for packaging, mainly designed to keep food and other products fresh for longer. Suddenly, there were plastic garbage bags, stretchy plastic wrap, squeezable plastic bottles, takeaway cartons, and plastic containers for fruit, vegetables, and meat. Within just a few decades, this multifaceted material ushered in what became known as the plastics century. While the plastics century brought convenience and cost-effectiveness, it also created staggering environmental problems. Many plastics are made of non-renewable resources, and plastic packaging was designed to be single-use, but some plastics take centuries to decompose, creating a huge buildup of waste. This century will have to concentrate our innovations on addressing those problems by reducing plastic use, developing biodegradable plastics, and finding new ways to recycle existing plastic. So let's get started. Visit ed.ted.com/endwaste. Not only can you educate yourself on the challenges of plastic waste, but you can sign up for a very special mission.
So again, one of the things about plastics is that they're polymers. They're most of them don't exist in nature, although they're taken from natural elements, but they're created chemically in labs, which makes many of them carcinogenic. In other words, if you get them into your lungs or into your respiratory system or into any other system in your body, they can cause cancer because your body doesn't know how to deal with them, yes? So first thing first, always wear coverings, always wear eye shields, always wear masks, always wear ventilators whenever you're dealing with anything that's plastic. Because again, over time, it may not happen today, tomorrow, but over time, plastic can be very harmful to your health. Again, once in a lifetime exposure is not going to hurt you, but every day, all day can be a very bad thing about plastic, so there's a big caveat, yes? Now, having said that, oftentimes plastic is used on stage to replace glass. Now, here's a little thing about glass. Glass can be very inexpensive. It is very readily available. The problem with glass is that it is extremely unsafe. It breaks, it can cause people to cut themselves or damage themselves. It is unreliable. And so I would do anything and everything in my power to avoid having glass on stage, and that usually means having plastic on stage. Now, for instance, just things, if you coverings for windows, coverings for framed photographs, that sort of stuff, is usually best achieved by using this plastic stuff called acrylic. Acrylic is very durable. It's very strong. It molds. I mean, you can bend a little bit. It comes in very colorful shapes, sizes. You can put it stuff that has fluorescent in it. The way that you attach this is you would pre-drill a hole and then use a screw, but don't screw tightly. It'll just screw it in place. But as soon as you screw it too tight, it will splinter and break off, yes? So again, you can drill a little pilot hole in it and large enough for the screw to fit through it, but that's how you would attach a piece of acrylic to an object, yes? But this can be used, or just put it into the frame if you're using it as a painting frame and that sort of thing. But acrylics can also be, this one is translucent, but you can buy them where they are pigmented, yes? Basically the idea of pigmented acrylic is what's called celastic. A lot of people, that's what they're gonna call it. Again, sometimes you can also break it down to pellets, and we'll talk about those there in a second. If you have a thin sheet of acrylic, it is what's called acetate. Acetate is, if you think about overhead projectors, that's acetate a little bit thicker than this. But again, it's a nice wavy sheet, and you can, it molds, or without any heat, you can move this around and cover things with it and keep things from breaking, all that sort of stuff. So again, acetate can be a very nice solution to covering your glass products, yes? Another thing you can do with elastic is you can, all plastics tend to melt around 250 degrees Fahrenheit. They tend to get malleable, workable, around 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Now the nice thing for us is that the boiling point of water is 210, which means that if you boil a pot of water and then stick some plastic in it, you can cause the plastic to sort of become workable. Now, I say it's workable, but it's boiling hot water. So you would definitely need gloves to work with it. A lot of times if you use antifreeze, the boiling point of antifreeze is a lot higher, well not a lot, but it's higher than water. And so if you heat antifreeze and then put plastic pellets into it, you can create a little bit more viscous fabric. This is elastic that has been, so it's plastic inside of some cellular clay, and you can use it to form masks, that sort of thing. But you can, again, I wouldn't put it on a person's face at 220 degrees, but about 220 degrees it becomes moldable, and you can put it onto a clay mask that you've created of the person's face to create a mask out of it, and use that for that sort of thing, yes. Another type of plastic that was invented in the space program that's very useful to us is this stuff called Mylar. Mylar, the nice thing about Mylar, well, there's several nice things about Mylar. One thing about Mylar, as you can see, is it's reflective. You can use it for, there's Cody and Chris. You can use it for, if you take a heat gun to it, it'll create, it'll tighten up, it'll size. And so you create mirrors. Again, that way you don't have to have mirrors on stage that are made out of glass. You can have it made out of Mylar. Now, another thing about Mylar is that it holds electronic information. So if you've ever had a CD, the shiny stuff is the Mylar. It also is one of the reasons it was developed by NASA is because it's lightweight and doesn't allow oxygen to penetrate it, which is why the lunar lander was wrapped in this Mylar. It was gold on the lunar lander, and you can make this stuff gold very easily by the gold type of it. But that's what Mylar is. Again, it's very useful. If we talked about the Mylar curtains last time, which is just strips of Mylar that are used to create that nice shiny look. Yes. Now, the most common type of plastic that we use is usually what's called this stuff called polyvinyl chloride, PVC. PVC comes in a couple of different forms. One is this stuff that's beaded. Yes, I'm sure you've had a coffee cup where you bit the end of it off, that sort of stuff. But it's just beaded foam that you can shape around a mold, or you can use what's called an electric knife. If you take a wire and send an electric current through it, you can just rake it down the side of this piece of PVC, and it'll create that shape. Yes, and so that's one way, like moldings around walls, that sort of stuff, are created out of styrofoam. Another thing about it is that, for instance, if you use spray paint on beaded foam, that's all this is, beaded PVC. And I just covered this in with some tape, with some masking tape. I painted the bricks, pulled the masking tape off, and then just spray painted with using just normal spray paint. And the spray paint actually eats away at the PVC. Of course, again, this is where you need the ventilation because you don't want to breathe that stuff in. But it's a quick way of creating something that looks like bricks. Again, this is the exact same technique. So instead of bricks, we're using it to create stone. Again, depending on how you paint the stone, it helps. Yes, so you can create different shapes of stone, that sort of stuff, but all that is beaded foam. Now, styrofoam is actually a brand name, and if you extrude it instead of beating it, in other words, instead of just sending out little pellets that you mold together, if you just make a sheet out of it, it's what they use for insulation in houses, and that can also be a very inexpensive way to create large walls of brick and stone, is by using this extruded PVC that's used mostly for, and usually it's in blue color, but sometimes it's yellow and sometimes it's pink, different variety. It's just like different types of sweeteners. Yes, different companies make this stuff. It's not expensive to make, but again, it's a very cheap and inexpensive, readily available because everybody needs R protection for their heating and air conditioning, and that's what it provides. Because again, one of the nice things about all this plastic is that because again it's unnatural, it doesn't allow oxygen to penetrate. Yes. Another type of plastic is styrofoam. Is foam rubber. Foam rubber is mostly because you really can't mold foam rubber. It can be, but it's tough because it's flexible. But it is very useful for padding and upholstery. It's very cheap. It lasts forever. It doesn't mold or deteriorate, as opposed to chicken feathers or the other things that they've used in history for padding. But foam rubber is fantastic for that sort of stuff. PVC can also be made into pipes. And so instead of having copper pipes in your walls, most businesses and companies now in homes nowadays have their plumbing made out of PVC pipe, polyvinyl chloride, PVC. And just like with the styrofoam and the extruded foam, PVC pipe can be warmed to around 240 degrees, 250 degrees, and you can bend it to shapes and create patterns, that sort of stuff. One of the things with the sheet stock, again, you can have the extruded foam, or you can just have a sheet of PVC. And again, it's the thickness of it determines the schedule of it. It's schedule 40 or schedule 20, that sort of stuff, millimeter thick. There's a couple ways of doing that. One is by using what's called a vacuum form machine. And again, you can use a vacuum form machine with acrylic as well. It's the way your bottles are created for your water bottles and that sort of stuff. But you have a mold. You heat the plastic up to 240-ish, 250-ish degrees on one side of the vacuum form that has basically looks like a big toaster oven. And then you can either drop it down on top of your mold or flip it over. If it's a very large vacuum form machine, it'll flip over. And then whatever the mold is, you have cut or pre-drilled holes in it so that when the vacuum is initiated, it draws all the oxygen out from underneath and forms the plastic to the mold. Again, plastics don't allow air to penetrate. Again, here's a couple of videos. The first one we're going to look at is the vacuum form molding, how to create things out of a vacuum form machine, just because I'm sure my description made perfect sense to you. So here's a little bit about vacuum forming.
Hello, tested audience and everybody else, it's Adam. I am today standing in front of a piece of equipment that you might have seen if you've watched our videos, sitting in the corner of my shop gathering dust and covered with crap. It has been pulled out front and center because I'm about to use my 2 by 3 foot vacuum forming machine. This is a beautiful machine. It is a great size. This actually has been used in special effects. I know a few weeks ago I used my baby vacuum former on Tested for the first time. I figured it was also time to break this out. Now, what is vacuum forming? Vacuum forming is taking a sheet of plastic, like this sheet of ABS 1/8" plastic, putting it in a frame, lifting that frame up to a heating element, which is that. Yeah, this will all work when I get it going. Heating it up until the plastic gets droopy and then pulling it down over a form. Now, what kind of form? What do I mean by a form? What I mean is I will pull it down over a buck that I made out of MDF. That is my buck. Now what this is an OPS. It's the device that goes on top of an astronaut's backpack in the Apollo era, and this is an exact replica of the shape of that. I want to make some out of ABS plastic, and that's what I'm going to use the vacuum former for. So we'll walk you through the steps. Let's double check that that lifts. Excellent. All right. So once this is up, I turn on the heaters. Now I have 12 heating elements in here, and I can turn on 6 at a time with these 2 switches. I can turn on the odds or the evens. But before I turn any of those on, I want to actually activate the vacuum. The vacuum comes courtesy of these 2 5-gallon air tanks. What I will do is I will use this vacuum pump to evacuate both of these tanks like this. Now it is pulling a vacuum. When it's pulled a vacuum, I turn it off. It's not a full vacuum yet, but this is just to tell the point. Now these are under vacuum, so I will, once this plastic gets hot, pull it over my buck and I'll activate the vacuum. And that will suck the plastic down over the buck, in theory. In practice, it's a bit of a touchy art form. I don't expect the first pull to go perfectly, but I will learn enough to make the second and third pulls go really nice. Here we go. The first 6 heating elements are a go. So now the ABS is slowly heating above my MDF buck, and I wanted to droop a fair bit. Now I have a problem that if I turn on all of my heaters at once, I'm actually going to blow my fuse. So I can turn them on for about a minute to get this ABS sheet warm before I'll blow the fuse, and I don't want to do that because I need the fuse to pull the vacuum. There's a lot of moving parts to this, but Hopefully, when this thing droops down to about here, it will be flexible enough that when I pull it down over the buck and, wait, where is it? Yes, push this frame down around it, I should be able to get a really nice pull of this. Oh, it's doing good. It's doing good. It's getting nice and soft. Let's give it a shot. We're gonna give it a shot. Here we go. Turning off the heater, bringing it down on top, bringing this down here, and yes! I think that's quite reasonable. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that is a very reasonable approach. Let's see. Good, good. I'm pretty pleased with that, even though I put the ABS in upside down. I didn't want the textured side up, but it doesn't really matter. This whole thing's getting covered with a cloth anyway. Whew! I haven't used this machine in years. Where did you pop a hole? I heard the hole. Ah, that's where it went. Copy that. Okay. I know just the tool. Reciprocating air saw. This ought to do it. I learned a bunch of things during this form. I learned that I think I got the plastic actually too warm. I learned that I need a tighter I may have to slice in order to get this off, but I'd rather not if I don't have to. To manipulate this until I get it out. Yep, here it comes. Come on. Come on. Come on, little doggy. That's it. Ta-da! There we go. First test casting of an Apollo OPS. And that's my large vacuum former. Isn't that cool?
And then you can also create patterns using several varieties of equipment. You can have a blowtorch, you can have a heat gun, that sort of thing on pipes. Again, one of the things this video is going to show you is to keep the pipe consistent. In other words, a pipe is going to have a hole in the middle of it. So if you fill that with sand, it'll keep it from crimping. But here's a little video about how to bend a PVC pipe.
Hi, I'm Mike Thompson. I was working on some monitor mounts and needed PVC bent at 45 degrees. Now I like to avoid paying for things that I don't need and learning something in the process if I can. I wanted to avoid gluing fittings on this and then having to stick it. It was just a mess. I didn't want to mess with it. So I tried bending my own PVC. Let me show you how easy it is to do. It's fun too. I found a few ways to do this, and PVC softens when it's heated, and you can bend it to any shape you want and then hold it in position until it cools and stiffens back up. The first thing I did was to use a torch to quickly move it back and forth over the pipe. This works if the city is about to be destroyed and the only way to save it is to bend some PVC pipe, but I don't recommend it for any other reason. Two more practical ways to heat a PVC pipe are with a heat gun or in the oven. The heat gun allows you to only put the heat where you need it, but you actually have to find a heat gun, plug it in, hold it, turn it on, move it back and forth, all while being ready to bend it around some form once it begins to soften. If your pipe starts to turn brown, then it's too hot. If it gets much hotter, all sorts of invisible killer gas can come off this thing, and that's not ideal. The magic temperature here seems to be about 250. And if you need to bend the entirety of a piece in some complex multi-plane shape, then just throw it in the oven for about 10 minutes, plus or minus, It depends on the wall thickness. I've bent Schedule 20 and Schedule 40 this way without problems. Oh, and anytime you need to bend a tube, you have to keep it from collapsing. How do you do this? Well, there's a couple ways. I typically pack my tubes with sand and tape up the ends. It works very well, and then you can bend it by hand or around a cylindrical object. If you want to get really fancy and make a bending die, you can cut some wood circles on your table saw and stack them, and then cut the pipe profile close in the lathe. Then finish it out with some sandpaper around the pipe. This is only the second time I've done this sandpaper thing, and it's really neat. I wouldn't want to try a bend radius smaller than 4 times the pipe diameter. A little bit of crinkling on the inside of the bend is okay, but any large fold and all strength is lost. Once it's warm, you have a few minutes to form it before it cools again. Look, my pipe is rubber too. Once you have your shape, you can hit it with some water to set it faster. Now, I'm not necessarily recommend that you do this because a lot could go wrong, like burns, fires, poison gas, death, all sorts of nasty things. I ended up not using these monitor mounts for this project because I actually needed access to the back of the monitors occasionally, and this system just wasn't going to work. But I'm going to show you this monitor mount system in a future video. Go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm Mike Thompson, and thanks for watching. I really appreciate it.
Cool. Now, another way of joining PVC pipes together, in addition to heating them, is to use what are called cold fittings. Cold fittings are like elbows, T-shapes. There's a variety of them. Here's a good look at some end caps and some 45-degree angle pieces. You put them together using this PVC glue, this gray PVC cement. Again, the nice thing about the cement is that you want to coat both sides, the inside of the joint, as well as the PVC pipe itself. You don't let them dry, but you let them set just a second so that they're, you could go ahead and put them on together, but then they take a lot longer to dry. So I would let them set for a minute or two and then put them together. I'm sure the can will have directions that will tell you exactly how long before you put them together. But then once that bond is made, because it is plastic holding plastic, and it has basically recreated a polymer, the bond that is created with the cement is actually stronger than the PVC itself. So I'm not saying it won't break. I am telling you it'll break it somewhere else other than the joint. Unless, of course, you haven't stuck it in far enough into the joint itself. There's a little, usually with most of the joints, there's a little stopper to keep the PVC pipe from going in too far. Again, you want to make sure that you've got the right size joints for the right size pipe. Might as well mention it here. We'll mention it more when we talk about cutting pipe. But pipe is always, when you talk about half-inch pipe, it is talking about the internal dimension of the pipe. So a half-inch pipe is a half-inch across on the inside. 1-inch pipe is 1 inch across on the inside. Now, because PVC is stronger than steel, the walls of the pipe can be thinner than the steel. And so whereas your fitting has to fit a 1-inch pipe using the outside dimension, if that makes sense, but the inside dimension is 1 inch, but because the wall is thinner than it would be if it had been steel, the inside dimension is going to be a little larger than 1 inch. So there's nothing on a 1-inch PVC pipe that is 1 inch, unless you cut a 1-inch length. But they're still called 3/4 inch fittings. They're still called 1-inch fittings, all that sort of stuff. But again, you don't measure them across. It's just basically it's a misnomer. But you just go with it. These 1-inch pipe fittings will fit 1-inch pipes, although nothing on the 1-inch pipe is 1 inch. So just something to know. Okay. All right. So that's a lot about different types of plastics. Now, what we're about to talk about are different types of adhesives or glues, is what we're going to call them. A lot of these are also made out of plastics. Some of them are used, they're thermoplastics. In other words, you heat the plastic up and it becomes very moldable. They are extremely hot. They are extremely dangerous in that hot condition. They can cause major damage. So just be aware. The first two we're going to talk about are not dangerous: wood glue and white glue. A lot of times the Elmer's company is a standard stock company that makes a lot of different types of glues. But they're going to be a lot of times referred to as Elmer's glue. Wood glue is almost always yellow. Wood glue works really good, as it might suggest, on wood. Wood is very porous, has a lot of open holes in it if we get microscopic scale, and wood glue adapts to that very nicely. You can dilute both wood glue and white glue with water, so you can make it more thin with those things. It doesn't necessarily make it stronger, it makes it weaker, as a matter of fact. But you can thin it out a little bit, so if you have some old glue in a bottle that is kind of viscous, put some water in there and swizzle it around, and it might get some of it out of there. If you're looking to fill a gap or a hole in something, a lot of times what you can do is take wood glue and sawdust and make it together to a paste, and put that paste in, let it dry, and then take a sander and sand it down. That's a very nice wood filler, again, for theatrical purposes. I wouldn't use it to fix your furniture because it's gonna have very heavy grains. Sawdust doesn't do that well, but if you have very fine sawdust, maybe. Carpenter's glue, yellow glue, wood glue is the bomb whenever you're dealing with we're dealing with wood, which is what we're dealing with 75% of the time. The problem with clear, or what I'm going to call white glue, is that it is a non-settling glue. Whenever you have a bead of glue, white glue, it's going to dry to that bead. It doesn't get smaller. And so one of the things about white glue, whenever you put a seam or put it over to cover something, you always want to wipe it flush, because that's the way it's going to dry. If you don't wipe it flush, if you've ever seen a glue bottle on the side of it, may have some drippings, and it looks just like the actual drip itself. Yes. But again, both of those are going to cost you about $30 a gallon. Now, having said they're about $30 a gallon, that's if you buy a gallon of it. If you think about it, most times you're going to buy, well, even a quart is a lot. Most times what you're going to buy is about 3 or 4 ounces of glue, which is 1/32 of a gallon, which means that if the gallon costs $30, you'd think the glue you're going to buy should cost $1, right? Because it's a 30th of the glue of the whole. That glue that they're going to sell you in a 2-ounce, 3-ounce bottle is going to cost you about $5, $6 a bottle, and that's how Elmer's makes their money. They make it by downsizing the product and selling it for an exorbitant or raised price. Yes, so it's much cheaper to buy one bottle of the small size and keep it, and then just keep buying gallon replacements and using it that way. The next type of glue we're going to talk about is hot melt glue. My God, this is the one that is the dangerous one I'm talking about. That'll burn the cheeses out of you. Hot glue uses a hot glue gun. Sorry to step out of frame there, but this is a hot glue gun. The nice thing about glue, it comes in a little stick, and you can also get sticks that are already opaque. So this is just a piece of plastic that when you put it through, this nozzle heats up, and again, this has not been on, so it's nice and cool. But as soon as you can see how it has been used, and you can tell that tip gets very, very hot, and it melts this hot glue gun. And of course, if you put two things together, they want to go, you have some working time, maybe a minute before this thing cools enough to where it no longer will work. Wood, it doesn't work too well on, but plastics, it works great on, because plastics are thermoplastics just like this, and the heat of the hot glue will actually heat the plastic and cause it to form a bond with that. You can see there's little strands here. One of the things about hot glue is that if you come up too quickly, you'll create little spider webby things like this. So again, you want to squeeze, you want to glue, and then at the very end, press down and sort of go the other way to create where you don't have these little strands. Yes, but that's just a warning about that sort of stuff. Yes. Now, one of the nice types of glues that are leveling glues is what I'm called contact cement. It's airplane glue. Yes, it can come in a variety of packages. You can buy a gallon of contact cement, or you can buy little tubes of it. Again, the little tube's going to cost you $7. The gallon's going to cost you $40. That sort of stuff. It's great for if you're going to put tile floors down, that sort of stuff. It's the bomb. If you're going to put carpet down and glue it down, contact cement is great. Contact cement works best, again, when you coat both objects. And when you press it down, whatever it is gonna be stuck there. It is not workable. Contact cement, using contact cement, when you put one side to the other, you have glued those two things together. So here's a little video talking about contact cement and how to use it.
This is Weldwood contact cement. This is the kind that I use all the time. This is how you use contact cement. I am painting a thin coat on each side. I happen to be bonding textured to smooth on this one. That's not important. It'll still work if it's smooth to smooth or textured to textured. Now I have to wait for this to dry. I do not want to put these together right away. That would be wrong. Wait for them to dry. Give them about 10 minutes. These are my two pieces. This is now dry to the touch. That is what you want. It is no longer shiny and wet looking. It went from a shiny finish to a matte finish. I'm only going to get one chance at this. This isn't one you can pick up and move around. So I'm going to figure out where I want it. And push it in place. And then I want to give it pressure. The more pressure that I can give it, the more contact that I can make with this, the better. I'm really squeezing it. I'm really giving it some force. Now that is stuck right now. That's really well stuck together. But its full properties won't happen for about 4 hours. Contact cement. That stuff is pretty awesome.
So again, forewarned is forearmed. Again, you're going to hear this different kinds of glue called this, but super glue, what do you call it? Crazy glue. There's a bunch of brand names for this glue that is extremely strong bond. It glues the cap itself to itself. But it only works in very small quantities. Mostly because super glue is an epoxy resin, and epoxies work through a chemical reaction. And so when superglue is exposed to air, it transforms from superglue to an epoxy resin that holds whatever touches it together. Doesn't matter, wood, concrete, doesn't matter. Crazy glue, superglue, all those things are all epoxy resins, and they're great at holding if you have two different things that are very, very different, steel and wood, plastic and steel, whatever, that's going to hold things together incredibly well. Yes, probably the least effective form of glue is rubber cement, although it is a very nice type of of glue. If you're trying to frame a picture or put something in a frame, it's a great way to work. Again, as with contact cement, rubber cement, you want to coat both objects and let them mostly dry. And then when you place it down, the nice thing about rubber cement is there's some workability. And for those of you who ever worked with rubber cement, if you have any excess or any spill, the nice thing is you can rub the edges and get all the little boogers up. Here's a little bit of a video about how to use rubber cement.
When you use rubber cement, this is actually a glue that is used improperly a lot. So I'm going to run you through how to use it. I like to use the best quality. It doesn't stain the paper. Elmer's will stain your paper and you get a yellow cast to it. So to open the bottle, I want to get the excess off that paintbrush, off that brush. Then I'm looking for a smooth coat and also a thin coat. This we don't need to have swimming in glue. Put a thin coat on it. I always like to glue on top of a piece of paper. It protects my surface. I put this coat to the side and I actually covered the other piece of paper that I'm going to adhere to it. So you put glue on both sides of the papers that you're gluing together. In the rubber cement, you allow the solvent to evaporate off of it. You don't mount it wet to wet. You actually have to let it dry so that it forms a strong bond. So once the solvent evaporates, you're left with a thin layer of rubber or latex, right? And these two get positioned right on top of it. It creates a very strong bond, and it's a bond too if it's dry. If you're using it dry, it's something that you don't want to pull apart. It's not going to move apart as much. I see students use it this way. Right? Put a little bit here. And then they take something and they position it on there. It's not the correct way to use it. Could it work for you? It's not as strong as a bond. The other thing too is you don't want this excess glue. You're gonna have to wait for that dry. So when you're gluing, you may find out that you get some excess left over on your piece of paper. This is a rubber cement pickup. It's essentially a glue eraser for rubber cement. So when you use this thing, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you have incredibly clean surface with a strong, strong bond.
All right, so there's a little bit about glues, yes? The next thing we're talking about is tapes. Again, tapes have an adhesive side to them, but they have a variety of materials that hold them, let them hold things together. The strongest type of tape I'm going to say is duct tape, D-U-C-T tape. Often because it is mispronounced, often people call it duct tape, D-U-C-K tape, but it has got a fabric woven into the vinyl that is the tape, and then on the other side has a very strong adhesive to it. I will warn you, if you ever have duct tape, if you stick it to itself, it will not unstick. And so be very careful before you place it down. Even if you place it down wrong, it doesn't come up very easily. So it's made mostly for heating and air conditioning units. You will also see silver tape that is often called duct tape because it is used for air conditioning and heating ducts. But the type I'm talking about has the fabric in it and tears straight across the grain because of the fabric, yes. You also have gaff tape, which is very similar to duct tape. A lot of people confuse the two. But whereas duct tape has a vinyl covering and is made out of polyethylene, the gaff tape is cotton fiber, yes? And it is used extensively by what are called gaffers in television and movies. And so that's where it gets its name. It's used a lot in ballet to tape mylar floor pieces together. The thing about gaff tape is that, as opposed to duct tape, we put duct tape down, it's stuck. Gaff tape, when you put it down, you can lift it up pretty easily, but then when you press it, and again, a lot of times you want to walk on it or press it down to the floor, once you pressed it into place, then it becomes difficult to remove. So for that reason, I call it a pressure tape. You really have to work with it in order to keep it down. And again, a lot of gaffers use it. Now, a lot of times when it is cut very thin, excuse me, you can use it in what's called spike tape. Again, here's a little bit of gaff tape. It comes in a variety of colors. Black, white, and gray are the most common. But the nice thing about gaff tape is that it'll peel up, and you can see how easy it is to tear. And then again, the same sort of thing. It lifts up very easily, but the more you press down on it, the harder it is to get up. But when you cut into a thin strip, this becomes what's called spike tape. And again, this is used to tape floors, to put where spike where furniture goes or where people stand, that sort of stuff in television, film, that sort of thing. But it is the same material. It is just thinner cut. And again, when you make a spike mark, usually you want to create a little V. So you have two pieces. Then when you put them together, will create the edge of your leg or your table or whatever it is you're trying to spike. So there's a little spike to put on the floor. Fortunately, it's blue on black, so you're not gonna really see it. But that's spike tape. Now, we're gonna have a little demonstration. This is fun stuff. There's another type of tape called glow tape. It's fluorescent tape. Here's a little example. This comes in a variety of sizes. You wanna touch kill the lights. Let's see if it works. Yay! At least I can see it fluorescing. I don't know what it looks like on camera. Turn it back on. But it creates a little bit of fluorescent, and again, you use this and put it where there's blackout on stage, corners of desks, corners of doors, that sort of thing, so that the actors can move about the stage with confidence, that they're not going to run into things or that the doors are open, that sort of thing. Something that's very similar to gaff tape and to duct tape, to spike tape is stuff called electrical tape. Electrical tape is often called insulated tape, because the nice thing is it is made out of a plastic let's see, nothing, given enough voltage, everything will conduct electricity. Yes? Having said that, insulated tape tends to not conduct electricity. And so you will find this electrical tape, and because it comes in a variety of colors like spike tape, a lot of people will confuse it. The problem with electrical tape is it really sticks best if you wrap it to itself. When you wrap it and try and stick it to the floor or stick it to something else, it doesn't really hold. But if you take it and wrap it around itself, it holds like a charm. And so that's electrical tape, but it can be occasionally used for some spike tape. Clear tape, packaging tape, scotch tape, all that becomes very familiar, and most of you use that in your daily life. So that is stuff that you probably are all very familiar with as it is. Masking tape is also probably something you're very familiar with. Masking tape is used mostly in the theater to mask where you're going to paint, so that you can paint over it. So here's a little video showing you how to use masking tape. Great. So now you can all go home and create brick walls or concrete walls in your house that look realistic using masking tape. That'll be exciting. Just a reminder, again, this is not due for another month and a half now, but because of the materials we've been discussing today, and because again, they are very carcinogenic, I like to remind people here that you need to find a material for your material safety data sheet. Yes, you want to contact the company. You want to have a report that tells me what your process was, who you may have talked to, how that reporting went, and then if you actually get a material safety data sheet, you want to report or do a little review of what about it is dangerous, if it explodes, if you need to store it at certain temperatures, or if it is something that can be used if you swallow it, or if you get it rubbed on your arm, how you react to it, and that sort of thing. So again, just a little heads up about your material safety data sheet. All right, we'll see you next time.